Insights on behalf of TTRA. Welcome. It's a pleasure to spend another afternoon with you. And thank you for putting all these destinations on the map for us on the chat feature. Before we start, a couple housekeeping notes for us. Everyone is on mute only mode. We'll be using the chat feature for questions and answers. And please sit back and relax. The recording and the slide deck will be available to you. So just enjoy the session, grab as much as information that you can gather. We have Evan Sanders, Vice President of UberMedia with us today. Lots of big data. As many of you know, UberMedia is a leading mobile data analytics company, which works with destinations and companies around the world, providing them research and visitation insights. Prior to UberMedia, Evan founded Attract China, a tourism marketing company focused on Chinese travelers coming to the US. Evan was the CEO of Attract China for 4 years, serving 250 clients and speaking around the world globally. He's also the winner of HSMAI's Top 25 Most Extraordinary Minds. Evan is an avid traveler and a club sandwich enthusiast. Listen to this. He documents his adventures on his blog, clubsandwichreviews.com. Make sure to check his site because it's a love affair. It's all around the globe, from South America to Turkey to US, everywhere. It's a really fun site. We are so pleased to have Evan with us today. He has an exciting big data presentation looking at the summer travel, especially comparing 29 to 20. So put your seatbelts on, lots of good data. And Evan, welcome, the mic is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Ezra. As Ezra mentioned, I'm Evan Saunders. I'm here flanked to my left and right by Evelina Jiang and Chris Freeman. I'll be giving the presentation today, and many, if not all of you, know me. But behind me is a much smarter and much more talented team. Many of you do know Evelina, but Evelina and Chris really help with so much of our deliverables for our tourism partners, processing, analyzing the data specific to answering questions. So while I'll be doing the talking throughout this presentation, Evelina and Chris, you should know, created actually a lot of this presentation. And they'll be around for Q&A at the end of this, especially talk about methodologies and honestly review whatever it is you'd like. So we're gonna go as fast as we can through this presentation. I've timed it to be exactly 30 minutes so that it doesn't take up everyone's time. But please, throughout this whole presentation, submit your questions via the chat box. Myself, but honestly, more importantly, Evelina and Chris will be around to answer the questions that you guys have after this webinar. So please submit them, write down what slide it's on if you want to go back to a slide, because we'll pick them all up at the end of this. Because we're really excited today to review the differences between 2019 and 2020 when it comes to summer travel. And as I said in the email notes that went out, we wanted to have fun with this because hopefully 2020 is the most unique and different year of summer travel than we may ever see, and perhaps a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And so while it might be in many ways a negative once-in-a-lifetime experience, let's have a little fun with it as researchers and look at it more as a case study to understand and how it might impact travel for years to come. This slide in front of you really illustrates a lot of the changes of 2019 and 2020. It was hard to pick just 2/4 images that did just that. But many of us are used to receiving travelers in urban environments flying from airplanes, are now looking at travelers taking different means of transportation to different destinations. And so we're really excited to walk through some of the differences between 2019 and 2020 over this 30 minutes. Today's goals, we have 4 main goals for you. One is we wanted to make sure everyone understands what mobile location data is. Our company, in many ways, we're a data company, and there's a lot you can do with it. So from the get-go, we wanted you to understand what this data is, to set a nice baseline. And of course, showcase different applications of the data. We're not here to sell any products. We really wanted to just take a topic of data and show you different ways it can be used by itself, as well as in conjunction with other data sets. And then of course, we want to dive into some really unique insights and have fun with it. It's very, very important. The way we're going to basically do this is by pretending we're tourists ourselves. So we decided UberMedia, we wanted to come up with the most popular tourism destinations in America for summer travel. And that's a very tough question to answer. What's the most popular places to go in America on summer vacation? So we pretended to be an average American tourist and go to Google and type in that question in various forms. And lo and behold, over and over and over again, US news came up as a top Google result when trying to understand what are the best places to vacation in America. I personally never read US news. I wasn't so familiar with it, but the average American researching top places to vacation is going to be landing on US news over and over again. So all of the destinations that we've picked out in this presentation are thanks to Google and US News. It was the most unbiased way, I guess you could say, to select these destinations. We want to do a lot of them, but again, as you can see from here, we have 30 minutes to jump through all of this, and we didn't have all the time in the world. So we want to make this more fast-paced and cover those goals. So quickly, we're going to go about mobile location data. Next, we're going to look at US News' top national parks to visit in this summer: Yosemite, Yellowstone, and Glacier. And then we're going to travel outside of national parks and look at beachside destinations. Truthfully, the top 3 were in Hawaii, but because Hawaii has a quarantine in place, we've decided to choose the number 4 and 5 on US News' list, which are Outer Banks and Laguna Beach, opposite ends of our country, to then show you how mobile location data can dovetail with other data sets as well. And then we're going to touch quickly on what does this mean. Again, please submit your question and answers, because number 5 on this list is the Q&A portion of this. For those that don't know, UberMedia does live and breathe tourism. We work with a lot of destinations on a lot of different, both project-based and ongoing work. But I think more importantly is a bulk of our work is done through other vendor partners out there. We work with almost every vendor, and they honestly use our data all in unique ways. So if you work with vendors out there, I encourage you to ask them about UberMedia data and how they use our data, because I promise you, it's just awesome to see different research companies are using our data in very different ways, and we love to support them in that effort. So please do reach out to your vendor partners. At UberMedia, a lot of you might not know, we also do a lot of work outside of tourism. 10% of Fortune 100 companies use our data. But the reason I put this up here is that it's interesting to see these logos, shopping centers, restaurants, shoe stores. They use our data the exact same way tourism boards use our data. And this is where we're going to segue into just educating everyone in this audience about mobile location data. Mobile location data, essentially from a high level, works very similarly to a survey. It doesn't replace a survey. It just works very similarly in the sense that we're trying to get a really, really large, very, very large sample size of individuals to then ask them specific questions about their movement and patterns. So what are those questions that mobile location data can answer like a survey? Where are people coming from? Their length of stay? What are they doing and who are they? So where are people coming from, like in-state versus out-of-state, or overnighters versus day trippers, or where in Canada are they coming from, or where in Mexico are they coming from? What are they doing, such as what hotels are they staying at, or Airbnbs, or what attractions are they visiting, or what areas of the city are they visiting, or combining those two. When in-state day trippers visit us, what do they do versus out-of-state day trippers? So it's a lot of fun to combine the where and what categories with our data. And then there's the who question. So the data is all anonymous. We don't actually know who these people are, but there's a lot of cool insights that we can pull out of thanks to this human movement data that we'll, illustrate at the end of this presentation as some of the examples. So when you think about mobile location data used as sort of a survey, think about these 3 questions. We can't ask people, did they have fun on their trip? who planned the trip, would they come back again, what was their favorite thing on the trip. A lot of these emotional questions we can't answer, but the human movement side of the data we can. And we do that all through mobile location data. So if you've ever downloaded an app to your phone and the app says this app would like to know your location while you're using it, could be a game, a news app, a weather app, a sports app. UberMedia collects data from over 120,000 different apps. What we do as a company is essentially all day, every day, we're like drinking from the fire hose, where phones are going and what they're doing. And it's not like phones give off their location 24/7. Your phone might give off its location once an hour, a few times a day. And that's why it works really like a survey, where we're trying to get a huge sample size of where phones are going, what they're doing, to paint a statistically extremely accurate picture of tourists and locals or whoever you want to study. So what we're doing at UberMedia is all day, every day, collecting this data real time. We're doing a lot of work to process it, contextualize it, and essentially make sure it's really accurate. And then we're storing it on our servers for researchers like yourselves to query and ask questions about. So we already have all of this data. We're literally constantly collecting it, and it's almost like this treasure chest. And what does that mean? It means our data goes back over 4 years. So we already had all of this 2019 and 2020 data, and we have access to data on about 1 billion people around the world, close to about 300 million devices here in America. And we're just sort of constantly collecting that data for you guys to honestly ask questions about, or for vendors to use in a lot of different ways. So it's very fun. So what's the process to go through and actually make this data actionable? And this is a reminder, feel free to submit Q&As. I'm gonna go through this pretty quickly because I wanna get to the meat of this, but feel free to submit questions so we can come back to it. But essentially starts with geofencing, selecting a time frame, and looking at data sets. But we always get the question is, how do we know what a tourist is, and how do we know where people come from? We use these two methodologies. First is common evening location. So how do we know where someone comes from? How do we know someone's phone is actually from LA if their area code, let's say, is in New York? It has nothing to do with the area code. Think about your phone. Your phone goes back to the same location almost every evening over the past 3 months on average. That is your phone's common evening location. That must be where your phone is from. So and that starts at a very accurate level, GPS level, accurate to 3 meters. So that's your phone's common evening location. That's where it's from. On the flip side, phones also have a common daytime location. That's the place you're going to during the daytime, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, your office, if you will. For better or worse, many of our common evening locations are our common daytime locations since the pandemic happened. But prior to the pandemic, you could easily see where someone lived and someone worked in a different area. And so when we think about tourists, oftentimes we're looking at people that live at least 50 miles away, but also don't work in the studied geography or area. A place like Los Angeles, people are easily commuting 50 miles. So it's important that we don't take these commuters and include them as a tourist, even though they live pretty far away. So CEL and CDL, we use those a lot, and Evelina and Chris might mention those when they answer your question in the future. So how do we take this data and make it really actionable and usable for you? Starts with geofencing. Here you can see a geofence or a polygon of Waikiki Beach in Hawaii. You can geofence anything. Basically what geofencing or polygons means, it just means look at data in this area. We already have all the data, so it just tells us to make sure you look at data here. And of course, I drew this quasi-good polygon around Waikiki Beach, and I selected the time frame on the bottom, which is Christmas through New Year's, 2017 and 2018. And essentially what I wanted to understand is, where are these people coming from? This is essentially how data works. You geofence location, select a time frame, and you look at a data set. And so this is an example of a data set that answers where do people come from when it comes to mobile location data. We use this all the time at UberMedia. Column A right there, every single row is a different device ID. It's a different device, most likely a different person. So all those rows in column A are different devices, and they're all visiting B column, which is Waikiki Beach, the polygon I just drew. And the question we're answering here is where they come from. And so C and D are the latitude and longitude of where people come from. They're common evening latitude and common evening longitude. Really great if you use mapping software. I use just Excel, so not as useful for me. Very useful for Evelina and Chris, not as useful for me. So E through I contextualize that. E is the country, F is the state, G is the zip code, H is the census block group, I is the DMA. So we can easily summarize this if we want to look at in-state by zip code, out-of-state by DMA, or state itself, which is great. And then J through M shows us when we saw these people. You can see basically everyone here is celebrating New Year's Eve on Waikiki Beach. Great. We love producing data sets like this. And that's really how mobile location data works, whether you're looking at one location or you're looking at 1,000 locations. So when we start thinking about travel to 2020 versus 2019, absolutely we start asking, are people going places? And I think the answer, as we all know, yes, we all see people on our Facebook feed, or maybe you've gone places. So where are they going? We'll get to that, but we know where they're not going, unfortunately. And really around the country, we have not seen an influx of activity in downtown urban environments. Here's just 3 cities across America that actually participated in an UberMedia webinar from a couple of months ago. But here we're seeing essentially really not even close to pre-pandemic levels. And keep in mind, a place like Boston in the middle of winter, back in March, and encroaching on spring, it's a pretty cold place. So this only goes through July here. But as we really dig down into Boston a little bit more, we can essentially see, as much as last week, we saw a little blip over Labor Day weekend. A lot of college students moving back into Boston. Families are coming here. Almost every college is open. Incredible COVID testing that they're doing for all college students here. It's not even at the foot traffic that it was back in January and February. So we're seeing a slow and I guess really steady in many ways foot traffic and activity increase, but it's not even close to what it used to be. This is a really cool chart, by the way. You can go on to covid19.ubermedia.com, look at Boston as well as other cities around the world, and track both new COVID cases in that city as well as foot traffic in that city on a daily basis to see how few places around the world are comparing from Asia to Europe and of course here in America. So if people aren't going to downtown urban environments, well, where are they going? Well, we see them going to more outdoorsy places, not just anecdotally, but also in the data. This is a dashboard we have in place with the U.S. Travel Association. You can go on to ustravel.org/research, and you can see our national parks dashboard with them. It's updated on a weekly basis. This is just a screenshot until sort of mid-June that I could fit on this one slide here. This covers about, I think, 20 different national parks, and we can see foot traffic trends. We can understand what percentage is local versus tourist, as well as for the tourists, what origin markets are making up the tourist selection. So we are seeing an increase. Granted, national parks aren't the most popular time of the year in middle of February, and we're seeing numbers similar to middle of February back in mid-June. Still, we're seeing an increase there. It's great to see. I've had a lot of friends visit national parks. So it's fun to, I think, dive into that data. The great outdoors. And study 3 of US News's top national parks to visit in America. So again, this is 2019 study by US News to put together these 3 national parks in 3 locations. They're not super far away from each other in the grand scheme of things, but they have a lot of different data that we'll have fun looking at with mobile location data. So we're gonna talk about these 3 questions right here. Again, I'm going to go through it fairly quickly. Submit your questions. We'd love to get back to them. We'd love to talk about methodology as well. We're going to let you as the audience draw some conclusions here. You're all expert tourism researchers and marketers, and we want you to kind of think why the numbers look like this. We have our own opinions, and I'll throw them in there, but please draw your own conclusions about all of this. So let's look at some high-level numbers first, and let's just a stark difference between these 3 different national parks. Here, we're looking at out-of-state visitation, and it's changed year over year. So we're covering June and July 2019 versus June and July 2020. Now, California in of itself had a lot of COVID restrictions in place. So forget even Yosemite for a second. If you're trying to travel into California from out of state, you're met with not just a lot of warnings, but also a lot of things that are just generally closed. Almost everything indoors in California felt closed at one time, and even a lot of outdoors things, including the beaches, were closed at some time. So this really perhaps inhibits the desire to travel, especially longer distances, to Yosemite. Yellowstone, we're seeing a very, very flat, but Glacier, massive increase in out-of-state visitation. So these are some really, really high summarized numbers, but what's a little more fun is to understand what's driving those high level numbers when it comes to individual states traveling there. Starting with Yosemite, obviously we see a drop in out-of-state visitation, but not every state is dropping. Nevada has a double-digit increase year over year, which is pretty incredible to see. Obviously, places like Florida, which is practically as far away as you can get, are going to see a decrease. Texas, you're seeing a decrease. Florida's dropping out of the top 5 there. Oregon dropping up to the top 3 there from number 6. So again, not too far away, but a great opportunity for them to get down. Yellowstone, we're seeing more people from Montana show up. But again, overall, it's pretty flat, the out-of-state visitation. I say that even though 7% doesn't sound flat year over year compared to Yosemite and Glacier, it kind of is flat. Glacier, of course, we're seeing a huge increase of out-of-state visitation, Washington being one of the biggest drivers. But we see the people who are traditionally California and Florida in the top 3 right there actually dropping, Florida dropping to 5, and Texas actually staying flat. Texas is pretty far to go still from Texas, but it was number 2 last year, and it's number 2 this year. So interesting to see. And then we can drill back down into the DMAs or metro areas. You saw how the data is contextualized for both. So I thought it was really interesting to look at Nevada and seeing that about 30+% increase basically being driven by the Reno, Nevada DMA, not necessarily the Las Vegas, Nevada DMA. Obviously, we can look at specific cities. We can look at even specific zip codes of this data, or even census block groups if you want to get super granular. But interesting to see not just the states, but the DMAs that can drive this visitation or lack of visitation. A lot of stuff in here, it doesn't come as a surprise. We see faraway markets dropping. New York and Yosemite going from 5 to 13 makes complete sense. It might even be lower than 13, some might argue. But a lot of this, we're seeing this local travel here. We see people in Los Angeles not actually taking the long trips up to Glacier, dropping from 5 to 11 in the 2020 ranking. So interesting to see these jockeying of positions. What I will be most curious about is taking this snapshot in time and then looking at 2021 and understanding, essentially, are we going back to 2019 levels, or has 2020 levels left a lasting impact on 2021 and beyond? So it is nice to take this as a spot in time that's unique, but see what residual impact it may have on future years, or most importantly, next year. The next thing we wanted to look at is length of stay within these markets. Now, this is interesting, but at the same time, obvious. Glacier and Yosemite were in phase 2 throughout the reopening of this summer. Restrictions both in and outside the campgrounds. With Yosemite, a lot of people just do day trips to Yosemite anyway, obviously. But to see that decrease, that stark decrease of 3 hours is interesting. And then, of course, Glacier, to basically go from an overnight destination to now a day tripping destination, is interesting in and of itself, but not surprising due to the regulations out there. But Yellowstone, of course, least amount of COVID restrictions, seeing an average increase of 5 hours by the amount of time people spent there. Really cool to see. Now, this is high level data. This data actually starts out for every mobile device, for every trip they take, what is their length of stay or dwell time within each park. So we can look at this by state or by DMA and understand each state's length of stay within Yellowstone, each length of stay within Glacier. So who is driving the substantial increase from Yellowstone? Is it people coming from far away, or is it people coming from bordering states? Awesome to kind of dig into that data. I wish we had time to on this presentation, but perhaps we'll write a little white paper later for that presentation on that note. So there we just took data, looked at 3 national parks, we understand where people coming from and what was their length of stay. There's a lot of ways you can slice and dice those 2 types of data points. We can even look at cross visitation of those parks to see if it exists actually. We can even look at in-state tourism as well, which we didn't even talk about right there, but is an important topic, especially when you think of locals being the new tourists. That's why that US News dashboard can be really fun to look at, because it actually does cover locals. But let's switch gears almost entirely and go on a different type of vacation. I have a 1-year-old. I was not able to go to a national park this summer, but I would definitely love to go to a beachside destination with our 1-year-old, just a little bit more manageable. So here, though, we're going to look at taking our data and combining it with Airbnb data, courtesy of AirDNA, as well as hotel data. And then we're going to look at demographic data as well. And so we're just here to paint a picture of the different ways mobile location data can be used. So we're looking at Laguna Beach and Outer Banks, and we're just understanding are staycations really happening, and who are these guests driving all of this staycation, all that stuff. Same time frame, June and July, year over year. First, we're just going to take a really quick snapshot at these airports that feed both of these markets, Orange County and Norfolk Airport. Yes, a lot of people drive the Outer Banks. Yes, there are multiple airports that cater to Laguna Beach, not just Orange County. Let's just take a snapshot and understand. Blue here is foot traffic in 2020. Gray is 2019 to these both airports combined. In January, actually, it started off as a great start. Both of these airports had more foot traffic than they did the year prior. Great, really great start. For obvious reasons, we couldn't keep that up. But traditionally, last year, we see actually these airports are traditionally flat throughout the spring into the summer. And of course, this year we saw a dramatic fall. That doesn't surprise anyone, but it was really nice to look at June into July and see a time when normally foot traffic is down, at least in 2019, to these 2 airports, or going down, that we saw an increase in foot traffic to these airports. Hopefully that continues. Interesting enough, I'm here in Massachusetts. We have a destination called Cape Cod, which is like, I guess, our version of Outer Banks, perhaps, if I can bring some similarity to those. They're very much, all of the news here is a second summer they're hoping for, is that September into October. So it'll be interesting to see if other destinations like Cape Cod and like Orange County and Outer Banks will experience the same. But anyway, that's airport traffic. But let's really dig into comparing Airbnbs and hotels. So we received this occupancy as well as the locations for Airbnbs from our partners at AirDNA, which is awesome to see this year over year increase. So Outer Banks, a double-digit year-over-year increase when it comes to occupancy at Airbnbs. Laguna Beach, we're still seeing an increase, more in July than June, but still, that's a substantial increase in many ways during a time when we think many people are not traveling as much. We weren't able to get this data from STR. If there's anyone on STR on this call, we'd love to get this type of data to work into the metrics so that we can see if they did see the same year-over-year increase, because our company internally had, we were curious. We didn't know if it saw the same year-over-year increase. So let's first talk about origin metro areas, comparing both Airbnb versus hotels, as well as 2019 versus 2020. So a lot going on this slide, but we've tried to sort of narrow it down by highlighting some things in green and red for you. Interestingly enough, oh, and this is only looking at tourists, by the way, people who live at least 50 miles away from Laguna Beach. And the Los Angeles DMA is quite huge. So just keep that in mind as you look at these numbers. Both Airbnbs and hotels are receiving an influx in people from Los Angeles. Airbnbs essentially were the top 5, all from California, interestingly enough. Whereas hotels still have people from Phoenix, Arizona driving into hotels in Laguna Beach. So really interesting to see basically the shakeup of these, to see the in-state travel that happened in California. Not surprising a place like New York falls off the map for hotels. Interesting that New York wasn't even the top 5 for Airbnbs though to begin with. Palm Springs, people apparently prefer Airbnbs. They're not traveling that far, whereas the people from LA preferred hotels. There's so much time I could spend on this slide. So perhaps we'll get back to it in the Q&A portion if you have questions on it. Interesting, Outer Banks saw some similarities, but not as Laguna Beach, but not as similar. again, we're going to highlight that Airbnbs and hotels saw similar increases and decreases, although Newport News increased in Airbnbs and actually dropped off the top 5 in hotels. That's just interesting to see how that works. I don't know why. I would love to dive into why that might be. And really what was most curious for me is Norfolk, Virginia for hotels jumped up to #1, wasn't even on Airbnbs or hotels 2019 top 5. Incredible to see that jump. Love to jump into why that might be, but hopefully as researchers, I can't do that in a limited time, but hopefully as researchers, you can both identify opportunities that might blend into 2021, as well as ask the question, well, why might they actually be showing up? Where were they going previously? I mean, so many questions, but ideally helping us craft how to further engage that market into the near future. Perhaps that second summer is a good opportunity for the Outer Banks with Norfolk. So before we review the data on this slide, I just want to talk briefly about the methodology we use to get this. And of course, please feel free to ask questions about it. So we look at demographics of where people came from. So again, this data is anonymous. We don't know the demographics of who showed up, but because we know where they live, we know the census block that they came from, and we know the demographics of the census block. So we essentially look at where people are coming from, what's the demographics of the census block groups that they come from. That's how we're sort of surmising who these people are while keeping the data 100% anonymous. So we're taking literally thousands and thousands of people and aggregating the census block data to come up with things like income, household value, education level, ethnicity, and of course, here's median household income we're looking at. I thought this was so interesting to see between the 2 years, Airbnbs were seeing over double-digit growth in the essentially the affluency of the census blocks that people are coming from, and hotels are still seeing growth amongst that. There's a lot of reasons this might be. People obviously lost their job, so certain people couldn't travel and they're very price conscious. On the complete flip side, you had a lot of people who had booked European vacations, who had those canceled and refunded, who then might have reinvested that money back into our domestic economy. So really interesting to see occupancy go up, at least in Airbnbs, as well as the affluency of the census block groups that people come from go up. So that's one data point when looking at demographics. The other data point that I thought was really interesting was comparing this to ethnicity. So what is the ethnic background of the census block groups that people are coming from? There's a lot of numbers on here and we don't have time to go through all of them. So the best way I looked at summarizing this up is there's not a lot of changes in ethnicity year over year. And that's really different than the change in affluency. So we're seeing a group coming from much more affluent areas of America, but they're just as diverse. So they haven't changed ethnically compared to the previous year. So same ethnic backgrounds of people, different affluency of people in terms of where they come from. So super interesting to see. I love this type of data. And again, when we look at 2021, it'll be so interesting if this type of thing stays the same. Do we see the affluency of where people come from go down or up? Only time will tell. So I got 1 minute, it looks like, to talk about what does this mean before we turn over into the Q&A side. But throughout this pandemic, I've thought it's been helpful to ask ourselves at the dinner table, what does this mean being here? What do we have more of and what do we have less of? It's a great question, I think, for everyone to ask themselves that reminds you that this is a really unique time in our lives. Next year will be different. So what do we have more of and less of? And we tried to take that approach to do that in under 60 seconds here at UberMedia as we look into the fall and winter and hopefully come out of all of this into a different 2021. A lot of this is going to be things that are fairly obvious, but one thing we've definitely noticed is that there's not more absence of travel, there's less absence of travel. Obviously, people are traveling long distance, people are doing less long-term planning, but there's also less options. And that sort of dovetails with the inability to do long-term planning. seeing a lot more short distance travel, a lot of interstate travel. We're seeing a lot of safe travel. People want to be safe, obviously, when they travel. They don't want to abstain from travel. So practice safe travel, we always say. We see affluent travels more. That'll be interesting. I don't know. But it'll be interesting to monitor that. We see destinations doing a lot more competitive benchmarking. So are we doing better or worse, quote unquote, than another destination, as opposed to comparing them to themselves? The scrutiny of asks is what is open, not just internally as a DMO asking ourselves, well, what's open, what's going to be open this fall? Can we sort of predict that based on the regulations that might come out? But also travelers scrutinizing that same thing. What is open? And then last minute opportunities. I can't tell you how many trips I've gotten changed or canceled because of flight differences. I've given up on some long-term planning. So you think about Thanksgiving time, you think about Christmas time, you're going to see a lot more last minute opportunities and last minute decision making on top of that. So I think I covered that in just about 30 minutes or just over. Again, that was a pretty fast overview of those goals that we wanted to get at the beginning, but hopefully you all had fun in the process, because that's essentially what we tried to do.
Oh, Evan, thank you so much. This was delightful. And at the end of the tunnel, also, there's some good news as well. Everyone, I know you have been putting your questions in the chat feature. We have already gotten some questions, and we have Evelina and Chris on the line too, especially to get into details with the technical questions. So I'm going to start with some of the questions and comments that were mentioned in the chat feature to make sure that we recognize everyone's valuable comments. First question came from Deanne from Missouri. She wanted to really understand looking at the polygons and geofencing, especially from state perspective. As you have said, Evan, anything can be put, if it's on a map, it can be a polygon, it can be observed. Can you also give the audience a little bit of the nuances with those observation areas? What are some best practices and what they should be looking for? Because anything on a map can be polygoned.
Yeah, it can, and you know, working with Evelina and Chris, we've gone through this a lot, best practices. It's one thing to geofence a location, but then you might have a highway going through that location. And you don't even realize how much that might impact, or a rest stop going through that location. Or another thing about mobile location data is if you have a building, like if you're trying to look at this, a CVS right here and it's above an office tower, you can't do verticality in geofencing. So there are a few nuances with that. But I mean, Evelina or Chris, any best practices we can give the audience when they're trying to drawing their own geofences?
Yeah, I mean, as I was mentioned, if you can see it on a map, you can, and there are people visiting that location, people with cell phones visiting that location, then we likely have data on that location. So whether it's a state or if you're even international countries, we do have data there, and we can tell you how much data we do have there. In terms of best practices for drawing the location that you want to study, we usually do a satellite view. So if you have a spatial software such as ArcGIS or Tableau or Carto, you can go in and literally draw the polygon, the boundaries of the location. So you use a satellite view. At UberMedia, we actually have a team of people who are drawing polygons as their main job description. And so they're going in and also looking at street view to make sure that the building ends right at the point that it's supposed to end, or we're making sure we're not capturing street traffic when we're looking at a specific location and a destination. So definitely would love to dig into more of these best practices with polygons. We've been doing it for many, many years and have perfected it as much as we can.
Oh, thank you, Evelina. So next question is from Pratt, and I think this is a really good point. You are looking at 20 trillion data points. It's big, big data. And Pratt's question was, can we get data from a geofence area from the last month or even last year? Sure. So when you are working on those big data points, time stamps, what comparisons are we looking at, both from a boundary and time perspective?
Sure. Chris, why don't you talk about the both historical ability as well as the frequency, the timestamps of the data and how granular people can get if they want.
Yeah, so we can pull data from several years back confidently. So we can go definitely 1 month and definitely the previous year. Yeah, and it depends on the size of the location that we're doing. So for how much or for how long that we're doing. So if you want to cover a full years of data with a really big, like let's say a full state versus like a full state or a city like New York City, it's going to be a little bit difficult being that there's so many points and there's so much activity. But we can still pull that data. It's just going to be a very large data set that you would have to filter.
Really large.
Yes, you can definitely go
Very,
back
very
to years.
large. And so with that, we work with the vendor or the client, the destination, to figure out what's the best solution for you. Can you handle 40 gigs of data coming into your pipeline, or do you want us to summarize the data to the metrics that you're interested in? So yeah, we can cover several years as well as break it down the way that you need to analyze it.
Yeah, and like we've gotten the question, like the person who comes to my destination on a Friday morning versus arriving on a Friday evening, do they do more stuff on that Friday, or are they getting there and just sitting at the hotel all day? So it can be broken down by the hour, even minute, if you want to. But yeah, it goes back as far as you kind of want in our timeline.
4 years, 4 to 5
4
years. And yeah, as Evan said, when we do receive the data, what we're getting, the main attributes we're getting are the device ID, which we anonymize, and then we get a timestamp. So you can break it down by month, break it down by day, break it down by year, and do those types of analysis. And then we also get the latitude and longitude where we see the device, the coordinates where we see the device. And that's how we're able to say, oh, they were actually in your destination.
Yeah, and I think in this day and age, time has been an interesting element because now everything is so last minute. Even yesterday, sometimes data can be stale. So when we talk about years of comparisons, I think our perception and how we are looking at competition, competitiveness, and time is going to keep changing. So next question is from Hugo. Evan, you had a slide about the top 5 origin markets when we were looking at the Airbnb and hotels. Mm-hmm. So Hugo wanted to know, where is the origin data coming from for these distinctions for Airbnb and hotels? Yes, it's exactly this slide. So can you give Hugo a little bit of a background on the framing of this question analysis?
Yeah, I'll sort of frame it in the sense that I'll sort of talk about the first half of it, and then I'll let Evelina or Chris talk about sort of the second half of the methodology that we use. But essentially, we have a large Polygon database at UberMedia, and it includes almost every single chain hotel in America and many boutique hotels as well. So we already have all of these locations geofenced in our library, which is great. It makes the hotel part easily. And then we teamed up with AirDNA, who provided us the location information for Airbnbs that we then went in with, as Evelina mentioned, the Polygon team, and then added Airbnbs in those locations to our database.
And I just saw Kellen's remark here, Kellen Cruz. He said, I think she said, hey, Hugo, AirDNA provided the Airbnb and VRBO property locations, and then UberMedia layered that in with the mobile location data, demographics, origin, and
yeah, it's neat. You know, when you occupancy levels are awesome, but what we can tie with mobile location is that human movement side. So those people that stay at hotels, what do they do? Or people who attend an event, do they stay at hotels or Airbnbs? It sort of bridges the gap between what's that person doing when they're not at the hotel, you know, or even if we were to aggregate hotel data or Airbnb data of like a low scale, mid-range luxury, do those guests can go out and do more things? Do they have different origin markets? It paints more of a picture than just occupancy levels on there.
Thank you, Evan. And the story also you told about North Carolina was really beautiful in terms of meaningful targeting and what's happening from a state perspective. So we really want to recognize what North Carolina is doing. And when they put a remark here that North Carolina did a really good in-state travel campaign for the summer. So looking at the locals, the micro, hyper local markets, I think that's a really encouraging case study and data point to see.
Mm-hmm.
And Christine also mentioned about the Norfolk, Virginia beach data. By the way, I'm in Richmond, Virginia, so I know exactly what's happening in Norfolk anecdotally as well. The leisure markets are doing really well. And Christine said Norfolk, Virginia Beach has been the #1 market from a weekly average occupancy perspective. So it's really encouraging to see some of these parallels between different data points, whether it's STR, geolocation data. At the end of the day, we are always triangulating. Any other aspects of data triangulation that UberMedia is doing that you want to tell our participants today?
Yeah, well, just to sort of bridge up what you said, even my brother and his wife and 3 kids went to Outer Banks for the first time ever this summer, had never been before, and now they want to go back every summer. So I think, you know, in terms of seeing how this type of data flows into 2021 and beyond is important. Getting people who have never been to a destination, perhaps even in their own state or their own backyard, to then love that destination and want to come back for years to come is an incredible opportunity that may happen for years to come. People who are really excited about their trip to France this summer and instead had an incredible trip in America may actually choose to repeat that type of experience in the future. In terms of combining data sets, though, and not just looking at where someone came from, we do a lot of that at UberMedia, but also our vendor partners that we work with do even more of that. They do a ton of combining our data with weather patterns, with marketing information, with Google Analytics. So it's one thing to look at who's going to your website, but who's actually showing up in market. And we love that. And Evelina and Chris, you know, we work to provide a really strong piece of the puzzle. And sometimes it's a predominant part of the puzzle, and sometimes it's a smaller part of the puzzle when analyzing a destination.
Perfect. And Nandini also had a question in terms of different data sources. And this question is about the census data. Aggregated demographics, including ethnicity, are used from census, which is under the circumstance, but not very accurate. Did you do or are thinking of doing a test to see if the aggregated demographic profiles to the real accurate by doing a survey, etc., in some census tract areas?
Yeah, Evelina, would you walk through how our census data has, we've done a study, I'll just let Evelina answer the question.
That is a good point to recognize. Like, is there any bias, or is there a demographic bias in our data? And so we are using the American Community Survey, and what we've done to help validate the demographics data and the spread of data that we have is we did look at how many common evening locations fall within a census block group, what that represents in terms of demographics, and then compare that to actual US demographics in those census block groups. So we have done a demographic study with our data to look at bias and have found that there is a slight bias that is towards lower income groups, but that number is very, very small. So we recognize that. We've written a paper about that, looking at that not only in the US, but also internationally for some of our major international countries like Canada and Australia. So around that's what we've done in terms of looking at bias.
And if you're interested in that white paper, shoot me an email and we'd be happy to walk you through it, because we're really transparent with this type of topic.
Yeah. And our data with the common evening locations, we do provide that at the device level. So you do receive the latitude and longitude, jittered, of course, for privacy reasons, but also it's contextualized by census block group, by census tract, state, country. And so if you have your demographic, own demographic resource, so or a psychographic resource, you can readily pair our data with that third-party source.
That's fantastic. Another question on methodology. Does your data cover all cell phones?
Evelina, walk through the intermittency of data and answering.
And maybe we can pull that slide too if needed, Evan,
yeah.
about the apps.
Yeah, sure. Oh, it's all the way back. Oh.
Yeah, and as Evan's pulling that up, so in order for a device's data to be included in our pipeline, a few things have to happen. So as Evan had pointed out earlier, a user has to opt in to using the app and also using the location services on the app. So when a user opts into that app's location services, then it also gives permission for the app to start collecting data. So to directly answer your question, we don't have all data on all cell phones because not everybody has opted into sharing their location data. And then another reason for that is because how much we're collecting data from the device is dependent on the app and how frequent that app is collecting data. So for example, Evan and I could have gone to the same destination. So we both went to Yosemite together. But my phone is giving off data every 5 minutes, and Evan's phone is giving off data every 3 hours. In that, the device would not be showing that Evan is with me at all times, right? Because we're only seeing him every 3 hours. But for me, it looks like I'm all over Yosemite because I'm getting data collected every 5 minutes. So it is also dependent on how frequent the app is collecting data. And that's why we don't see everybody that's in a location or at a destination. And we definitely treat this data as a survey of devices that we see in a location.
Yeah, it might be the case too that your phone gave off a lot of data over the weekend as you were using it a lot, but when the work week starts, you're just on your email app and you're not giving off your location at all. But the goal is to get a large sample size, and that's why we don't use pure mobile location data as a population tracker to say, okay, because we saw 100 people at this destination, we know there was 100 people at this destination. It's really more of just like a survey. We're trying to survey 100 people. It doesn't mean 100 people necessarily showed up, but with the large sample sizes that we get, they're extremely statistically relevant.
And next question is from Hugo. He wants to know about the origin of visitors coming outside the US. How do you manage the restrictions related to GDPR for the European countries?
Yeah, and I'll just sort of show you, I'll answer it a few ways, but one is you see the column E right there, country. We have 3 countries on there: Argentina, Australia, and Taiwan. So we do get data from over 180 countries, and that's the benefit of honestly working with global partners. But you're right, GDPR and CCPA are both actually really great programs into place to protect privacy that we're huge proponents of. Let me actually show you, see if I can, something we were awarded over the summer because of our essentially dedication and commitment to both CCPA and GDPR. This is provided privacyshield.gov. This is a United States essentially service that is describing how we've gone through the process of adhering to the strictest protocol that is required by GDPR and CCPA. And so you can go on and look on this on Privacy Shield. This is live right now to show that we are adhering to protocols, and we do have to adhere to protocols regarding GDPR and CCPA, both when we're looking at data in Europe, when Europeans leave Europe and go to another location, when we're presenting specific data sets, what we can include in those data sets. So there are a lot of great policies in place to protect privacy, but that is at the core of our company, is we want this data always to be anonymous. So we're huge proponents of this. I'm not sure, Evelyn or Chris, if you have anything else you want to add to that, but we see GDPR and CCP as great things, honestly. Yep.
Perfect. And a couple other remarks were about regarding data points. You can go back to 5 years. Luke also looked at it on your website, and also going back to timestamps and how long the person or that device was at the destination. That is also possible, looking at average time spent and etc. And that comment also came from Nandini and Luke. We are wrapping up.
Ezra, just to that point, we have data sets that are specifically focused on length of stay. You know, when you think about, and it gets actually really complicated, but when you think, we don't just look at how much time someone has spent within a location, we also look at their time spent outside of a location, inner dwell time, outer dwell time. We look at length of trips. We look at the difference between dwell time, which is perhaps, did someone spend 30 minutes at that museum, to length of stay, which is just someone spend 3 days at that city, in which case they might have gone outside the city for an hour to go visit a museum, but their length of stay didn't change. They're still overnighting or staying in that city. So there's a few different methodologies. And again, Evelina and her team have written up a white paper to talk about calculations of length of stay, so we can be transparent as to how we look at that.
Yeah, I think it will be really great for our audiences to share those white papers, because tourism at the end of the day is a mobility industry, and understanding those patterns in visitation and behavior is just giving a different perspective. We are coming close to the top of the hour, and I want to end our session with a slide that Rebecca requested. That last slide that you had, Evan, when we are talking about those takeaways from a consumer behavior, whether it's safety and health, well-being, competitive benchmarking, micro trips. Let's do a synopsis for our audience, and that will be our closure. This was wonderful with all these questions on methodology, but let's end it with the trends and what we are expecting as we reach the second summer.
Yeah, the second summer, and then really, when you think about travel over Thanksgiving and New Year's, perhaps a lot of people are saving their quote of pent up demand for that. Think about how you can embrace these types of things we're learning over the summer and apply them to Thanksgiving and New Year's. We here in New England have leaf peeping season coming up. It's a beautiful time to not just be in the outdoors, but also stop by one of the many cities in towns in New England. And so thinking about perhaps going leaf peeping is not a last minute decision. You're talking about your family, but perhaps the booking aspect is a last minute decision. So staying top of mind, understanding occupancy rates, how they're fluctuating, look at what other destinations are doing in the area, trying to, while stay top of mind, also take advantage of last minute opportunities. All of these things are going to be really important as we try to stay engaged with the traveler. So, and then of course, as I said, around your dinner table tonight, perhaps talk about what do you have more of and what do you have less of, and perhaps we can get a little more grounded in the unique opportunities we do have at our fingertips here during this pandemic.
Oh, wonderful. Yes, it is hyper local, and micro trips are everywhere. And I think as the second summer is approaching, everyone will be chasing those fall foliage, the leaves around the country. But there's some good things happening, some positive nuances, even though the virus has really changed the landscape. But technology is definitely top of mind. And I love the fact that you talked about triangulation and how we can layer and enrich the data. Evan, Evelina, and Chris, on behalf of TTRA, Thank you so much for dedicating and acknowledging all this knowledge to us. And I wish everyone a wonderful, safe, wonderful week, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.